I'm going to try to explain sensory processing disorder as simply as I possibly can. This is oftentimes associated with autism or ADHD. It's important to know what the different senses are before we get started, and again, I'm going to try to use very simple terms. We have the sense of sight, the sense of sound, the sense of smell, the sense of taste, and the sense of touch. We also have a sense of proprioception. So this is basically knowing what position your body is in without having to look at it. So for example, how close your feet are to each other. We also have the vestibular sense, which is knowing where your body is in relation to space. So this kind of has to do with balance. In our day-to-day lives, we experience all of these different sensations constantly. And the typical person can respond to these things appropriately. They're not bothered by them. They can take in that sensory information and respond to it in a productive, healthy way. Someone with a sensory processing disorder either responds too much to these different stimuli or sensations, or they don't respond enough. So I'm going to explain that a little bit more. If you are hypersensitive to something, you are sensitive to it. For example, if you have a hypersensitivity to tactile sensations, you may find that that tag on the back of your shirt feels like a million knives. If you are hypersensitive to a visual stimuli, you may feel like the light in the classroom feels like a spotlight that's 3 inches away from your face. Okay, this applies to all of the different sensations that we talked about in the beginning. Imagine if you were feeling that way about all of the different things that are happening around you all the time. It can trigger a very emotional response. You're going to try to avoid those things. You may see tantrums or behavioral issues when someone is exposed to those different things. It could be a sound, it could be a feeling, it could be some kind of a movement, it could be anything. Someone who is hyposensitive means that these sensations are coming in, but they are not really noticing it as much as they need to in order to respond appropriately to that sensation. So someone who is hyposensitive to the sense of proprioception, they need more input to get a sense of what kind of position their body is in. They might need that deep pressure. Someone who is hyposensitive to sounds may really enjoy really loud sounds or really loud music, and they're constantly making sounds because they need more to fulfill that sensory need. Someone who is not getting enough of the tactile sensation, someone who is hyposensitive to the tactile sense, needs to seek out different things to touch so that they can get enough of that sense to feel calm and regulated. So all of us have different sensory needs. Some of us respond inappropriately to these different sensations. Someone who is hypersensitive to any of these sensations is going to try to avoid them. They may have emotional reactions when these things are happening, or they have to be in an environment where these things are present. Someone who is hyposensitive to these sensations is going to be seeking them out. They might be crashing into things, they might be chewing on things to get that deep pressure sensation. They may be looking for things to touch or things to listen to, or they may want to spin around a lot to fulfill that vestibular sense that they need. As occupational therapists, we help identify what they are hypersensitive to and what they're hyposensitive to. If you're hypersensitive, we find ways for you to avoid those types of sensations in the environment. Maybe it's wearing clothes that have a particular type of fabric without tags, wearing noise-canceling headphones, dimming the lights in certain rooms, being mindful about the types of environments that you go into. Someone who is hyposensitive, who isn't getting enough of those sensations, may have some kind of a sensory diet, right? A certain activity or set of activities that they engage in before working on a school-related activity. So maybe they have a deep pressure session, or they get to spin in their swing, or they get to listen to certain sounds or touch different textures. They can kind of fill up that need. They're ready to engage in that next task. They're calm, they're regulated. This is kind of the general breakdown of sensory processing disorder, and it's important to know that all of us have different sensory needs, right? I don't like certain textures. I don't like certain sounds. I can be, overstimulated by bright lights or whatever it is. It's finding ways to adjust the environment or the way that you do certain activities so that you're not limited by these things. You're not overwhelmed by these things, and you can still do what you need to do in your day-to-day life. I hope this is helpful, and a lot of these different products and more are available on otchoice.com under the autism section.